All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Mackenzie. I work at Bundle Design Studio. Thanks for coming to the ADU workshop for Bellingham Housing Week. We're really glad to have you. So for ADUs, as we get more dense in Bellingham, people continue to have kids, people continue to move here. Bellingham has presented this new way to increase density into our single family residence neighborhoods. It's a project type that we did a lot at Bundle, and we're excited to share some of that experience and expertise with all of you today. So a little bit about us. We're Bundle Design Studio. That's me, Mackenzie, and then we also have Dan and Zach here. They're going to be in the chat answering any questions you guys have, dropping links and resources so we can all stay connected throughout the presentation process. A little bit about us. We focus in building design. Our primary focus is sustainable details and connections and design strategies. We also do passive house through FIAS and high performance building consultation, building envelope consultation, HVAC consultations, space planning, interior design, site planning, construction administration. We've done commercial kitchen design, and we love to do education and community outreach and share our knowledge with you guys. We start from the beginning of the process, helping owners design all the way through construction administration. So let's get into it. So let's talk about the difference between ADU versus accessory buildings, because ADUs might not be something that you necessarily need. So making sure that you're choosing the right building type for your needs. So an ADU is a little bit more extensive according to what the city needs, and we'll dive more into that as we continue through the presentation. But you'll need land use requirements, which can be a lot. You're allowed to hook up a stove and an oven, and it's legally rentable. Accessory buildings are just building permit requirements. You don't need to go through land use. It can be for guests or for yourself. It's a studio or workshop. It's not rentable. You can still have a stove, and you can't have a stove or oven hookup, and has a different list of requirements. And real quick in the chat, if you want to put in, if you're trying to build an ADU or an accessory building, you can go ahead and drop that in the chat. And just fun to see what people have planned for themselves.
Mackenzie, I do also just want to say there was a comment in the chat about your mic being a little staticky. I'm not sure what the solution for that is, but just so you're aware. And I'm not sure if you're monitoring the chat while you're presenting, probably not, and it's probably the other people.
Yeah, Zach and Dan are going to be monitoring the chat. I'm not sure how I'm able to fix that static, you guys. I'm really sorry about that. Can you guys still hear me? Yeah, I can hear you fine. There's just a little like static a little bit, but it's not a big deal if you can't fix it. Just wanted to I'm sorry about that. I think it might be just the way it's going to have to go. There's not a lot of options. I'm sorry about that, you guys. Yeah. If anything's unclear, feel free to leave questions in the chat, and Zach and Dan are going to be great about answering those. So hopefully I'm a little bit more legible here. So let's get into it. So this is the ADU permitting process according to the city of Bellingham. So the two things that they really care about is your land use application and your building permit application. The land use application goes first, and we'll get more into the requirements for that later on. And it has a 120-day review time. The building permit application has a 30-day review time. That's not including corrections. Once both of those are approved, you get an approved building permit, and that has a 2-year lifespan. So you want to be strategic about when you're getting that approved building permit, so the project can be completed within that 2-year lifespan. You can start the building permits, like gathering those documents while the land use application is being reviewed. But if something comes up and the city doesn't approve the land use application, you might have to redo that work. So that's something to keep in mind. So let's get dive a little bit more into what is required for land use. And land use is just making sure that your proposed ADU meets the zoning requirements that Bellingham has put forth. And Zach is going to drop some links about where you can find those requirements. And I'm going to touch on each one of those briefly. So as we grow and our city gets more dense, we want to make sure that the fabric of our city is still really beautiful and really lovely. And one of the ways that Bellingham has chosen to enforce that is through making sure that the ADU is architecturally similar to the primary house. So they do this by, making sure siding is at least kind of matches the primary house. Roof lines are similar. If you have a gable on the primary house, you don't want to put a shed roof on the ADU. Window types, things like that. Just trying to get the two to match as much as possible. You also want to have access to the ADU, making sure you have a well-lit access from the street to the front door of your ADU. There's also parking requirements. So the primary house, according to the city of Bellingham, has to have 2 parking stalls. The ADU needs 1 parking stall. And that one can be a little bit tricky to satisfy as lots vary in size and there just might not be space. So that's a really common one that we ask the city to not enforce by doing a parking waiver, which comes with parking studies and a lot of paperwork. You also want to make sure that the ADU is within the setbacks that is defined in the land use requirements. There's also fixture count. So you want to be smart with what plumbing fixtures you're putting into your ADU. And Zach will drop a link to that as well in the chat, making sure that the primary house, if you have a lot of fixtures in the primary house, you don't propose too many into the ADU, and that bumps up your fixture count, which then bumps up the connection that you need to the city, which can be a pricey addition. There's also, if you're trying to convert an existing structure to an ADU, which we'll talk about later in the presentation as well, you want to make sure that you document that existing structure and start conversations with the city. Another big one is making sure that your ADU is below the building height limit. The magic number here is 20, and that is from the existing elevation to the midline of the roof of the ADU. And Zach should be posting that in there as well. They have a really nice PDF that kind of explains that. And then the biggest one that clients worry about and kind of is a constraining factor is making sure that you're under square footage. So the way that the city of Bellingham determines that is it's either 800 square feet or 66% of the primary house square footage, whichever one is more restrictive. So if you have a 2,000 square foot home, sure, 800 square foot ADU is fine as long as it fits on the site. But oftentimes we have houses that are a little bit smaller than that. So an ADU can only be 66%. Moving right along into the building permit. This is where the city of Bellingham makes sure that the ADU that you are proposing meets the building code requirements. And that's just your typical, architecture drawing set, making sure that there's life safety, fire safety. So we're talking guardrails, egress windows, tempered windows, things like that. Also making sure that their energy requirements are met. Washington finally approved the 2018 building code, which was kind of put on hold due to the coronavirus. And so we have a whole new set of energy requirements. This is something that Bundle really excels at. We try to make all of our buildings really durable, really sustainable, really energy efficient. Right now, the magic credits that you need for the energy is 3. I'm not sure how relevant that is to you guys right now, but Zach is going to drop some resources if you do want to get into the nitty gritty and read about, what those energy credits are. They're also concerned about utilities, how you're getting water, how you're getting electricity, how you're getting gas. Gas is kind of going the way of the dodo. on its way out, and we try to propose electricity as much as possible for all of your cooking and heating needs. They're also concerned about stormwater management. They're also going to be looking at structural. You can build this prescriptively based on the building code, or you can go through a structural engineer. And then sustainability is a thing that we like to incorporate into our designs. Designing for solar panels, for lighting, for heating, for shading. That's something that we like to incorporate into the building permit. So that is what is important for the city and what the city cares about. I'm going to start talking about the ADU process for the owner, for the designer, and for the builder. So the first thing to ask yourself is who's going to be living there? Is this going to be a, are you anticipating a family in there or in-laws? This is going to, this is going to change a lot of things about how you access the ADU, what the sound separation is going to be, what the privacy is going to be. You want to assess your site, make sure that the ADU isn't blocking sunlight and views for the primary house, that it's within those setbacks, that could have access to a courtyard, things like that. You also want to ask yourself if it's going to be attached or detached. This is really important for how it ties into the structure, for that sound and privacy like we talked about, and for who's renting the space. We also want to talk, when we start designing the ADU floor plan, we like to talk about owners about what their priorities are. Do you like big kitchens? You're not big TV watchers. Do you want a separate room for the bedroom? Are you anticipating the renters having kids and what that looks like? Someone entered the waiting room. It looks like you guys got it. So just making sure that we're on the same page about what those owner priorities are and that we're designing for those owner priorities. We also want to look at the type of construction and how that impacts, one, your carbon footprint and your energy efficiency, and also what's local and on site. Lastly, if you have an existing structure, and we'll talk about a case study that we have with that, making sure you're documenting that thoroughly. So at Bundle, we like to categorize things as an easy way to think about them into 4 types of ADUs. We have an attached ADU. It's attached to the primary single family residence. Detached, just like it sounds, detached from the single family residence. We have detached over a garage or carport or shed, and then we have an existing structure that we are converting into a legal rentable ADU. And we're going to go into 4 types of those ADUs that we worked at here at Bundle, so you guys can have a better idea about how each one of those went through the city, with conversations with the owners, have a better idea of how that gets run. So first we have our attached ADU. This is our Felicity case study. This one was recently built. This one was super special for us. The client was really on board with a lot of sustainable details. You see this beautiful juniper from sustainable hardwoods down in Oregon that goes over the whole building. These really fun, playful, red framed windows and doors. This is an attached ADU to an primary single family residence. So something that was fun and new with this is we started from scratch. There was an existing building here that was removed. Then we have a new home proposed with a new ADU attached. You can see that the square footage is below the maximum, 66% of 1252, because that's what the client wanted. They wanted kind of a smaller ADU. This one we got really lucky where we had 3 parking stalls, the 2 for the new home, the 1 for the ADU. We were able to incorporate those on site, which the city likes to see and we like to offer. You can see the walkway, well-lit walkway from Grant Street to the house. If you remember from the land use portion of the presentation, you can see how we're, the sewer lines and things like that. So a brand new structure. So if we look at the first floor, that view from the first slide of this project was taken from Grant Street here, looking at the building. And on the first floor, the primary residence gets the lay of the land on the front of the house, and the ADU gets the lay of the land of the rear of the house. And they shared this entry walkway here with the entry doors for each one of the units. Something that was really fun about this project is something that we have to think about. When you have an attached ADU, you want to think about sound transfer and utility and how to efficiently attach your utilities and gang those up. So we have our louder things like the stairs and the washer and dryer against this attached wall. We have plumbing along this attached wall. And mechanical along this attached wall. So things that make noise and things that they can share are all along that attached wall, while keeping the bedroom and the living room separate and closer to those windows facing the rear yard, and the living and the kitchen facing the front yard. When you go upstairs, the ADU has a deck above it, and we insulate insulate our roofs really well here at Bundle, so we're not super concerned about, stomping from upstairs, going downstairs, but you have a deck, so now the primary house has access and views to the rear yard. And you can see again that the bathroom is ganged up along that attached wall. Some elevations, just to get a better idea, you have that primary house 2 structure that goes along in the deck. That nice walkway here, and then solar panels on the south side. And that's our attached ADU. It was just recently built. This is a really lovely photo taken of the interior of that eat-in kitchen and of the mini split hanging on the wall with those fun red frames. And you can see the bedroom tucked along here. All right, going into detached ADUs. So this is a really preliminary rendering for a client here in the Birchwood neighborhood, where we have vertical siding and nice wood siding on the alcoves. This is a brand new detached ADU that we're proposing. So if we look at the site, he has plenty of square footage in his existing house. So we were able to maximize the proposed ADU square footage for 800 square feet. Something that's also really nice, he has a huge lot, so we're able to really put that proposed ADU at the very rear, give them plenty of space and privacy. We have something also pretty unique about this. He owns all 3 lots here. So in order to give access to this ADU, he's having to construct a gravel pathway, drivable pathway all the way down to the ADU, where utilities can run, where cars can go, kind of a big undertaking. So if we look at the floor plan of that ADU, we're able to provide covered parking, which the city likes to see and we like to provide. We have a covered entry patio. You enter through here. We have a nice, gracious kitchen, central dining, large windows opening up to the living room, covered patio here, and then 2 bedrooms. So this client's anticipating having maybe parents and a family, or just in-laws, or people who can use this office to work from home. Here are some elevations. So on the north elevation, if you remember from the site plan, that's facing the primary house. We kept that really kind of closed off. So this ADU, detached ADU, has a lot of privacy. That's part of the benefit of having the detached ADU. The east elevation has minimal windows. We really loaded up those windows on the south elevation, getting lots of natural light. And the west elevation, we kept a little bit more closed off so things don't overheat in the summer. And here are some more preliminary renderings. You can see that wood in the alcove where you entered here. You have this rear deck, part of it covered, part of it open, depending on the season, which one you want to use. And that wraps up our detached ADU. And I'm going to hand the chat or the presentation over to Zach, and he's going to present his Smith project.
Hey everybody. So yeah, talking on detached above garage units, we split this one off. This one's a little unique because of a couple of items mentioned early on. But one of the major driving factors of splitting this out is the garage or ancillary spaces. So if it's a workshop or garden shed, anything like that is going to count as part of that total square footage. So towards that 66% or that 800 square feet. And in doing so, that reduces the amount of square footage we have for the livable area. And then we also have the 20-foot height restriction. So that also plays an impact as well, because we still have to have our minimum requirements for the garage below. So where do we see this? We typically see these located on the smaller urban lots with a small footprint. Basically, we're able to go vertical with this build as much as we can within the ADU code. It also provides typically 2 parking spaces of those 3 that are required. And then we also get flexibility with 0 setback requirements from the alleyway if there is an alleyway. And we can also reduce the side yard setbacks as well to potentially 0 or close to it. That route does require an extra agreement between neighbors if that is going to be pursued, but it does give quite a bit of flexibility in a much smaller footprint. So let's see, what does this mean for the project itself? Generally means that garage, 2-car garage minimum footprint, and this is assuming we have about 800 square feet of usable buildable space for the ADU. Means that we're about a 20 by 20 footprint is often the starting space for that. And that generally means we've got about the same footprint upstairs as well. So typically a 1-bedroom or a 2-bedroom. 2-bedroom is probably out of the question for most of these just because of the reduced square footage, but 1-bedroom or studio is most likely in this arrangement. Also with that, because of that height restriction at 20 feet, often means that we're going to be living within the roof. So there's going to be some low portions of the ceiling, but we like to utilize this for storage spaces, cabinets, things like that. So it can still be useful space, but if it's below 7 feet, it actually doesn't count towards our overall square footage, which is really nice and does allow us to potentially move beyond that 20 by 20 starting footprint that we mentioned. It also means we're probably looking at exterior stairs to the 2nd floor living space. This allows us to not use up any valuable square footage with stairs. Stairs can take up quite a bit of space. And then if possible, we try to line this up with some kind of outdoor living space, probably somewhat covered, just to extend the amount of livable space, especially in our shoulder and summer seasons here, which is quite a nice option. And it also means we're probably going to push some of the mechanical equipment down into the garage area, again, just to maximize that living space upstairs. Okay, so jumping into the case study, Smith project we worked on. Small urban site in the Columbia neighborhood. It's a corner lot, so it actually has even more reduced setbacks from both the south and the east side. And it does have alley access, however, on the west side. So we're able to locate that garage and ADU all the way to the west side of the property there. A couple of the main things coming out of it from the clients, they wanted to have solar panels. So we used the DADU roof to have to be able to support those solar panels, which meant that we were going to be using this to match the shed roof design of the main house. We had flipped it there, so we were able to provide solar. And you also have that break in that common upper deck there, which is really nice. That allows light to come through to the neighboring north property and also the north side of the lot there, giving a little bit of a break. Let's see. And then public spaces, we pushed on the north side of the property, or north side where the entrance is. That was the high roof side, so the ceilings are much higher in there, so you have more room, the feeling of more room, and that the kitchen and living room area. While the south side, which is the lower ceilings, a little bit more cozy for the bedroom and bathroom. We also looked at reducing circulation as much as possible in such a small footprint. So it's kind of why you see that 4 quadrants, and no, you don't see any hallways or anything like that. You just have that one pivot point to move between the public and private spaces. As far as high performance features on this project, we have continuous exterior insulation with back vented rain screen wall assembly, which is pretty common on most of our high performance projects. We also used self-adhered WRB membrane and taped all the plywood for nice air sealing to increase performance. Lunos heat recovery system was used to provide fresh air at a preconditioned level, so we're not heating and cooling the space as much as possible as would otherwise be if we're bringing in cold air or warm air during the summer. So that's moderated out, so we don't heat and cool the place as much. It's also taking advantage of the Sandin heat pump system with a radiant application in this case, so we're heating through the floors. And I mentioned the solar panels above the roof, and we had nice sort of triple pane high performance windows, as well as an EV charging station in the garage. All right, and send it back to Mackenzie.
Thanks, Zach. So we're going to wrap up our 4th type of ADUs, being the existing building converted to an ADU. So this project is on Colshan. You can see the existing structure here. They have kind of a magical garden backyard with this really charming and quirky existing building that was in really great condition, had been there, before the 60s in some form and fashion, that they wanted to make a legal rentable ADU. So this is the site. See it here. We have the primary residence that was only 882 square feet, and the proposed detached ADU that was just an existing, artist studio essentially. That was 621 square feet. You can notice immediately that, that's over the 66% of the 882 square foot limit. So we had to write a letter to the city requesting that they waive that requirement for us, which they don't like to do, and it can be a little bit tricky, but you can make some compelling arguments so they see the legitimacy in that. Another thing that we had to keep in mind is that this existing structure was close to the south property line here, so that requires a lot of fireproofing on the south wall for a little bit of a renovation. And you can see there's no parking. There was no parking on it before we got here, and there's really no room for parking on it now. So we had to also do a waiver that requested us waiving parking, which there was plenty of street parking. They're not big drivers in the first place, so they don't have very many cars. And a lot of the neighborhood also participates in street parking. So we were able to get that waiver granted. So part of that existing building documentation, it can be really extensive. For this project, we had 15 pages of existing building documentation. So some of that looks like an inspection, talking about what's already there, you know, the fixtures and what era they are, so we can kind of determine how old this structure is. The electricity, making sure that that is up to date and safe, and also creates the vintage of the house. We also did diagrams of the insulation that's already existing in the two different types of roof on this one structure. We also dug into the city documents and the microfiche, going back from the 90s to the 60s, looking at old permits, looking at how long this structure has been there, which will help us not have to change too much to the existing really charming structure of the building in order to bring it up to current energy codes, just because it can be grandfathered in. It's been there for a very long time, and that's good for the owners of the house who, you know, like us all, are on a budget, and also good for, you know, not having to demolish a bunch of really serviceable, good quality things and send those to the landfill. So a little bit of a sustainable option as well. So this was the existing structure. We had a basement with a bathroom. Ceiling heights were only 6 feet down here. And then upstairs we had this kitchen, which didn't have the stove or anything hooked up. They were using this just as an artist studio when COVID hit, as a work from home area. And we proposed something that is rentable, livable, existing building converted to an ADU. So the basement storage, the ceiling height was just too short. So we changed the entire downstairs for storage of, you know, Christmas supplies or what have you. We built a wall and insulated these stairs to help with energy as much as possible. Upstairs, we brought that plumbing straight from the bottom of the basement up to the top floor to be economical and resourceful with our plumbing. Put a kitchen with a stove. Move the bedroom outside of this really small space that is less than 7 feet. So move that outside into the bedroom so we have egress through the alley, and added in a ducted mini split, an HRV, a lot of sustainable details that's going to make this comfortable and a healthy place to live. And that concludes our presentation. We're going to open it up to Q&As. You guys can feel free to raise your hand or just join the chat, and Dan and Zach are going to be answering some questions with me. Thanks for coming, everybody. Thanks for listening.
Thank you so much, Mackenzie and Zach. That was really, really great. I do want to point out that there's a great question in the chat right now. And I'm not sure if you got the chance to see that, but it's asking about the 800 square foot restriction and how that can be restrictive to using more energy efficient and green materials, as far as having thicker insulation in your walls. Have you come across any issues about that, or any variances you might have gotten from the city of Bellingham?
That is a really good point. We typically do 2x6 exterior walls filled with insulation, which is a typical design, and that extra insulation we put on the exterior. And so that isn't included in the gross square footage calculation. But yeah, I think it could be more open to things like that, especially if you want to fur inside of the building, you know, on those existing structures, to shove more insulation into those walls. That does eat up your square footage. That's a really good point.
Yeah, and per Brad's comment in the chat, this is not uncommon for jurisdictions to do that. Through the general descriptions or the general definitions within the code, it typically talks about the exterior envelope as the area calculation. And so some of it comes down to building siding, some of it not siding, and some of it comes down to representation by your designers as well. So what we would encourage is really paying attention to the energy modeling of your building to see if you need the type of walls that you're actually needing. From our experience being passive house designers, 11.5-inch thick walls seems, unless it has very low internal gains from uses, that sounds extremely thick, probably even beyond what passive house would require. So especially with these small structures, really paying attention to the design and the energy modeling of those wall systems to make sure that we don't get overly thick wall that penalizes you and then has complications with the city for permitting. But typically, from our experience, permitting with like an inch or two of exterior insulation has not been an issue. It hasn't even been raised as a question through the city of Bellingham. So they understand what's going on there. Yes, if you're trying to do like an insanely efficient building, like even beyond passive house, then you probably will have a conversation with the city if it starts impacting the building siting, like if you're extending into those setbacks or something of the sort. Did that answer your question?
I think that was great, Dan. Thanks for sharing that. And I'm not sure if anyone else has any other questions. We have about 5 minutes left or so. But I think it would be fun to hear from you all how many ADUs you all have designed and permitted since the June 2018 ordinance change, where all of the ADUs are now allowed everywhere in Bellingham.
Is that a question to us?
Yeah.
I
don't know.
It's kind of new, so we have, gosh, we have a bunch right now. I think even for on my plate as a project manager, I think I have 4 that have gone through land use, and we're trying to dive into those details for building permit. I think we're really lucky as a firm because we're so rigorous with energy before the 2018, where the 2018 code seems to be catching up a little bit, so it hasn't made that big of an impact on us, at least that I can tell. But reading over those documents, they're dense and take a little bit of time to get through. Zach, how many do you have on your plate right now?
I was going to say I have 1 in for land use permit right now. There's potential a couple other ones as well. Have worked, I think there's at least 2 that have already been built that I've worked on. And let's see. Yeah, I know there's at least multiple other ones that are at least exploring options right now for potentially more. So, and that's not to mention a couple that we did exploratory ones on to see if it made sense for some clients.
So. Yeah, that's great. It is a really complicated and complex process, and I'm glad to be able to have you all as such a you know it all so well, and the ADU handbook is helpful for sure, but that doesn't help with all of the green building aspects, and I love that you all incorporate that into your design. I do want to note that there is a question in the chat about the cost of construction to build an ADU.
Dan, do you want to take that? Things have gotten kind of out of hand with the.
Sure, I'll talk a little bit about it. So this is a very difficult conversation for us as designers to have. You know, it's never a comfortable conversation to have from the beginning, just because there's so many variables that go into a project, especially when we're talking about that last type that Mackenzie presented, where we're converting an existing building. The analogy we always use is grocery shopping. You know, how much does a bag of groceries cost? It's like, what's going into the bag? We don't really know exactly. But speaking specifically to the state of the industry right now, what's going into that bag right now are just pretty much a lot of base materials. And if you've been paying attention to the industry, wood's up like 300% over the last year. And so that's not even the last year. That's probably the last 3/4 of a year. And so that's really difficult as us for designers to answer that question on how much an ADU costs to build, because when we give a number at the beginning of the design process and then we see increases like that, there's two totally different numbers and very opposite and very hard to plan for. And so we understand that from a client's perspective, that they want to have those numbers up front to have some reliable information for budgeting and planning. Prior to the increase in cost, most contractors were saying anywhere from about $275 to $350 a square foot for a normal ADU. That's not anything like overly extravagant. Obviously, we can go way to the high end of that and go even to 500 square foot dollars a square foot if you wanted to, depending on what's going into that grocery bag again. With these new costs, though, with material costs, it's significantly more. The reason that the cost per square foot tends to be fairly high for ADUs is that it's a really small building. If we were building a 4,000 square foot house, even a 2,000 square foot house, we have a lot more scale that we can work with to bring those costs down. But when you have every trade from the excavator, concrete guys, electricians, plumbers, everything going into a really small building, all of those costs really drive up the cost per square foot. And so that's kind of the disadvantage of the ADU and these smaller buildings. But one of the things that we didn't really talk about is permit costs. And that's one advantage of the ADU in a lot of ways, is that you don't have, especially when you have an existing building already, an existing single family building, is you have significantly reduced impact costs. So paying for roads, fires, schools, all of those kinds of things. And so those are significantly reduced. The one thing that we would like to see change, though, is that we don't really feel that there necessarily needs to be a land use permit. It seems to add a lot of extra cost, a lot of extra time that isn't really doing a whole lot for the city. I think that there's certain exceptions to that, like our conversion of that building that was larger than the 66% of the main house. In those kind of situations, I would say that that's kind of justified. But from a cost perspective, that land use application and permitting process adds a ton of cost to the project that doesn't necessarily need to be there. So I know I very indirectly answered your question, but right now, with just, with the whole world the way that it is, it's very difficult to talk about. I would suggest talking both to a designer as well as a builder, kind of in tandem at the same time, because the builders are the ones that have their fingers in the numbers day in and day out. We can talk to our builders about what expectations there are for cost and for the direction of the market, but it's so volatile that our answers, if you were to ask us individually, will probably not be the most accurate. And so that's why we try and hook up an owner with a builder almost at the very beginning of the project.
Thank you, Dan. I do want to do a time check here. We have another event happening at noon. I will go ahead and share the link to that in the chat, but I'm sure Dan and Mackenzie and Zach are more than willing to stay on and answer your questions. We can leave this room open. But I just wanted to thank you all for your time. Thank you to the presenters at Bundle Design, and thank you to everyone who joined us today.